Okay, well, this is part 2. I wanted to pick up where I left off. Now, I'm not going to cover all of the things that everybody already knows about the so-called Bush connections, the conspiracy theories, and all of that. I know all of those details. I've studied this for years and years, and there definitely was something that went on during 9/11 that the American people have been kept from knowing about. One of the things I told you in the last video was that the FBI had 1,800 secret classified pages about the 5 dancing Israelis that turned out to be spies. They are Mossad agents, and they were seen on a rooftop, and the lady that saw them, she turned in their license plate number. They were later arrested, they were taken into custody, and they were detained, and they were interrogated, and eventually they were deported from our country back to Israel. And when they were on TV, one of them said that they were there that day to document the events as they filmed the tower burning. But I want to pick up here because I wasn't really sure which thing to talk about first. But the lawyer for the 5 men, these were the 5 Israelis, will later note that one photograph developed by the FBI shows one of the men, Siwan Kurtzberg, holding a lighted lighter in the foreground with the burning World Trade Center in the background. That was posted by New York Times, November 21st of 2001. It will apparently be determined at least 2 of the men are Israeli spies, but what they were doing and why will remain in dispute. One of these Israelis will later say, and he was interviewed back in Israel on a television program, he said, "Our purpose was to document the event." That was recorded by ABC News, June 21st of 2002. At 3:31 p.m. September 11th, 2001, the FBI issued a be on the lookout bulletin for 3 suspicious men who were seen leaving the New Jersey waterfront minutes after the first hijacked plane hit the World Trade Center. Shortly after, Yaron Shmuliel, one of the 5 Israelis found in the van, law enforcement officers in the greater New York City area were warned in a radio dispatch to watch for a vehicle possibly related to New York terrorist attack. The bulletin reads in part, "White 2000 Chevrolet van with urban moving systems sign on back seen at Liberty State Park, Jersey City, New Jersey at the time of the first impact of jetliner into the World Trade Center." And 3 individuals with the van were seen celebrating after initial impact and subsequent explosion. FBI Newark field officer requests that if the van is located, hold for prints and detain individuals. The van is located a short time later, and 5 men inside are arrested. 5 apparent Israeli spies arrested for puzzling behavior at the time of the first World Trade Center attack. 5 Israelis are arrested, and shortly after, an FBI lookout bulletin was issued for a van with the words "Urban Moving Systems" written on the side. Officers with the East Rutherford Police Department in New Jersey stopped the van after matching the license plate number with the one given in the bulletin. According to the police report, Officer Scott DiCarlo and Sergeant Dennis Ravelli approached the van and demand the driver exit the vehicle. The driver, Siwan Kurtzberg, does not obey after being asked several more times, so the police physically remove Kurtzberg and 4 other men from the van and handcuff them. They have not been told the reasons for their arrest, but Kurtzberg tells them, "We are Israeli, we are not your problem. Your problem are our problems. The Palestinians are the problem." Again, before the police have made any mention of the 9/11 attacks, another one of the arrested men says, "We were on the West Side Highway in New York City during the incident." In fact, it will later be determined that they were on the roof of a building at Liberty State Park, watching and videotaping the first crash into the World Trade Center tower. And that was recorded by the Bergen Record in Bergen County, New Jersey. The FBI and additional police quickly arrived. They shut down the section of Route 3 in East Rutherford where the van was stopped and evacuate a nearby hotel as a security precaution. Written in the Bergen Record on September 12th of 2001. One man is found with $4,700 in cash hidden in his sock. Another has 2 foreign passports on him, and a box cutter is found in the van. Recorded by ABC News of June 21st, 2002. And another has pictures of the men standing with the burning wreckage of the World Trade Center in the background. In addition to the driver, Sivan Kurtzberg, the others are also identified as Paul Kurtzberg, Sivan's brother, Oded Elner, Omer Marmari, and Yaron Shmuel. The men are detained but not charged. The next day, it will be reported that bomb-sniffing dogs reacted as if they had detected explosives. An investigator high up in the Bergen County law enforcement hierarchy will say in 2006, there are maps of the city in the car with certain places highlighted. It looked like they're hooked in with this, referring to the 9/11 attacks. It looked like they knew what was going to happen. It looked like they knew what was going to happen when they were at Liberty State Park, as recorded in the Bergen Record on September 12th, 2001. And the FBI will later conclude at least 2 of the 5 are Mossad agents, and that all were on a Mossad surveillance mission. The FBI interrogates them for weeks. They are held on immigration violation charges, but will be released 71 days later. And that was recorded by ABC News, June 21st of 2002. September 12th through September 9th of 2001, 2 more movers arrested in the U.S. suspected to be Israeli spies. 5 Israeli men working for the Urban Moving Systems Company had been arrested on 9/11 over suspicions that they had foreknowledge of the 9/11 attacks. And now 2 more Israeli men working for the same company are arrested. The 2 men, Roy Barak and Moti Butbol, are driving one of their company's moving vans in northern Pennsylvania when they're pulled over and arrested at around noon on September 12th of 2001. Barak has overstayed his 6-month visa and Butbol has no work permit. I'm sorry. Both were in the Israeli military. Barak as an ex-paratrooper and Butbol as a cook. Barak says he worked for Urban Moving Systems since the summer of 2000. The 2 are detained and sometimes kept in solitary confinement, but they later claim no ill treatment. Barak will later recall that U.S. interrogators were most interested if he was connected to the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, and they asked if someone sent me to the U.S. They asked me if I worked in a moving company so I could monitor people's movements. He's given polygraph tests and claims to have satisfied his questioners except on an issue of who sent him to the U.S. And on November 9th, 2001, both are deported back to Israel, as it was recorded in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution on November 18th of 2001. Late October 2001, intense political pressure to release suspected Israeli spies arrested on 9/11. Oded Elner, Omer Marmari, and Yaron Shmuel, 3 of the 5 accused Israelis, briefly appear on Israeli television in November of 2001 after being released and deported. This is a source in public domain via Israeli television. Around this time, intense political pressure is put on U.S. officials holding 5 Israeli men arrested for suspicious behavior at the time of the 9/11 attacks. According to the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, Deputy Secretary of State Richard Armitage and 2 unidentified prominent New York congressmen lobby heavily for their release. According to a source at ABC News, well-known criminal lawyer Alan Dershowitz also becomes involved as a negotiator to help get the men released. Dershowitz will later refuse to comment on the matter. ABC News will later report that it was high-level negotiations between Israeli and U.S. government officials over 5 men, resulting in a settlement. Apparently, the political pressure will succeed because the men will be released a few weeks later. November 20th, 2001, Israelis who videotaped the World Trade Center attack are released and deported. The 5 Israelis arrested on 9/11 for videotaping the World Trade Center attack and then cheering about it and holding up a lighter, like next to it, like if it was behind me, holding up a lighter, like they're lighting it on fire. They are released and deported back to Israel. Some of the men's names had appeared in a U.S. national intelligence database, and the FBI has concluded that at least 2 of the men were working for the Mossad, according to ABC News. So, they claim that the FBI says that none of the Israelis had any advanced knowledge of the 9/11 attacks, and they were released as part of a deal between the U.S. and Israeli government. Now, I always put my sources down in the description box in my research, and so one of these sites, I should say, has the actual FBI documents, part of which have been blocked out because, like I said, 1,800 pages are considered secret and they have not been released to the public, but are due to be released for some bizarre reason July 21st of 2035. I have no idea what that means or why. So now I'm going to move on to the supposed 9/11 Rothschild Zionist connection. The lease of the Twin Towers at the World Trade Center was bought just weeks before September 11th by Jewish man Larry Silverstein, Rothschild Zionist, and Frank Lowy, Rothschild Zionist, who both have very close links to Israeli leaders, including, which is now still the current Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, who said that what happened on 9/11 was, and I showed you, he said it was good for Israel, that the attacks happened in America. The World Trade Center deal was struck with Louis Eisenberg, which I showed you in the last video. He's a Rothschild Zionist, head of the New York Port Authority at the time, vice president of the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, known as IPAC, and a former partner of the Rothschild-controlled Goldman Sachs. Eisenberg is also close to the Israel leadership. Pictured here, who lobbied heavily for the New York Port Authority to sell the lease into private hands, was Ronald Lauder, Rothschild Zionist from the Estee Lauder Cosmetics family. He is involved with a stream of Rothschild Zionist organizations, including the Jewish National Fund, World Jewish Congress, American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, and the Anti-Defamation League. Buying the World Trade Center lease was a terrible business deal for Silverstein and Lowy because the towers were known as the White Elephants, given the state that they were in and the fantastic amount of asbestos that needed to be dealt with. Asked why he had bought the lease, Silverstein said, "I felt a compelling urge to own them." I bet he did. And when the deal was done, Silverstein and company massively increased the insurance for a terrorist attack and were awarded $4.55 billion after the towers were hit. The lease had cost $3.2 billion, and Silverstein reportedly only invested $14 million of his own money. The judge who oversaw the litigation between Silverstein and the insurance companies was Michael B. Mukasey, Rothschild Zionist, who later became a U.S. Attorney General. Silverstein and Lowy had originally been outbid by $50 million for the World Trade Center lease by a company called Vornado, whose chief shareholder was the Jewish businessman Bernard Mendick, and was Silverstein's former brother-in-law, and they had fallen out big time after his divorce from Silverstein's sister. When Vornado, despite having the best bid, suddenly changed their minds and suddenly pulled out, leaving the field free for Silverstein and Lowy, no wonder they called him Lucky Larry. Weeks after Silverstein and Lowy presented their final bid for the WTC, Vornado's Bernard Mendick died after becoming suddenly ill. So many suddenlies. Silverstein had breakfast every morning with the children in the window on the World Restaurant more than 100 floors up the North Tower, but none of them showed on 9/11. Silverstein said that he had at the last minute a dermatologist appointment, when in truth, as one his bodyguards has said privately, that he had a phone call in his car telling him to stay away from the World Trade Center that morning. He then got on his car phone to tell his children. It was Silverstein who said in a television interview, which he now deeply regrets, that when another one of his buildings in the World Trade Center, Building 7, or the Salomon Brothers building, was on fire, the decision was made to pull it, the classic term for a controlled demolition. And obviously, looking at the footage, you can see that it fell right in its own footprint. Soon after this decision, the building, which had not been hit by a plane, did indeed come down in a controlled demolition. The problem with Silverstein's story is that it can take weeks to place the charges in a building like the 47-story Building 7 to make it collapse in on itself as it did. How could the decision be made to pull it, and then down it comes? So it had to be planned in advance, and the explosives set in advance, obviously. Building 7 collapsed perfectly onto the land onto which it stood, and that could only happen with a controlled demolition. The charges were planted long before the official decision was made to pull it, and the whole 9/11 scenario unfolded from a pre-planned script. The BBC announced on live television that Building 7 had collapsed half an hour before it actually did because the authorities released the news too early. Wow. Wow, that's something. Security at the World Trade Center was the responsibility of the Rothschild Zionist-owned Kroll Associates, which has close links to the CIA and Mossad. Oh, and those men were Mossad agents. That's kind of interesting. Security at all three airports involved on 9/11 was run by ICTS International, Huntley, USA, companies owned by Rothschild Zionist Ezra Harel and Menachem Atzmon, and dominated by former agents of Shin Bet, Israel's internal security service and counterintelligence agency that handles security for the Israeli airline El Al. Rothschild Zionist-owned ICTS was also responsible for security at the Paris airport, where the alleged shoe bomber Richard Reed boarded his plane to the United States, and ICTS was providing the security at Amsterdam airport when the underpants bomber boarded his flight after paying cash for a high-priced last-minute ticket, boarded without checked baggage and reportedly even a passport. And as a result, travelers are now being radiated in full-body scanners, of which we'll talk about more in a moment. The CIA at the time of 9/11 was headed by George Tenet, Rothschild Zionist, and the investigation into the attacks was overseen by Assistant Attorney General Michael Chertoff, Rothschild Zionist, the son of an agent with the Israeli Rothschild Enforcement Agency, Mossad. Wow. Chertoff co-authored the notorious Patriot Act, which deleted basic rights and freedoms on the justification of 9/11, problem, reaction, solution, and then became the second head of Homeland Security, an organization also created on the back of 9/11. Chertoff now runs his own company, the Chertoff Group, a risk management and security consulting firm, which employs several senior colleagues from Homeland Security, and also Michael Hayden, a former director of the National Security Agency and the CIA. Chertoff was all over the TV networks after the engineered underpants bomber incident, urging the government to introduce full-body radiation scanners, which they then did. They are produced by one of the Chertoff Group clients, Rapiscan Systems. The underpants bomber, well, more the burn his own arse bomber, was, as I said, allowed onto the plane despite a string of red flags and apparently no passport through a security system operated by the Rothschild Zionist ICTS. The Pentagon at the time of 9/11 was controlled by people like Paul Wolfowitz, who's a Rothschild Zionist, the Deputy Defense Secretary who went on to head the World Bank, and Dov Zakheim. Remember that? Because I'm going to come back to it. Dov Zakheim, Rothschild Zionist, a dual Israeli-American citizen. He was on Bush's team. Okay, so he's got dual citizenship between Israel and America, and the Pentagon controller who managed to lose trillions from the Pentagon budget, a fact that was announced on September 10th of 2001. Anyone wonder why this announcement was not widely reported? Did something happen the next day then? It had to be a coincidence. Surely they couldn't have known what was coming, could they? Zakheim also wrongly classified squads of U.S. F-16 and F-15 fighters as military surplus so they could be sold to Israel at a knockdown price and bought with American aid money anyway. This and other military sales, often gifts, means that Israel, with a population of just 7.5 million, has one of the biggest air forces on the planet. With love from Dov. The Bush administration was famously controlled at the time of September 11th attacks by the so-called neocons or neoconservatives. These were led by a cabal of Rothschild Zionists like Richard Pearl, Paul Wolfowitz, Dov Zakheim, Robert Kagan, Douglas Faith, Louis Scooter Libby, the disbarred American attorney and convicted felon who was former advisor to Dick Cheney, and William Crystal, editor of the Rothschild Zionist Neocon propaganda sheet, The Weekly Standard, owned at the time by Rupert Murdoch, a Rothschild Zionist. Oh yes, and this gang also included Robert Zoellick, now head of the World Bank, who took over in that post from his neocon and Rothschild Zionist colleague, Paul Wolfowitz. I repeat, Jewish people make up only 1.7% of the American population, and many of those are not Rothschild Zionists at all. The ratio to positions of power is simply fantastic, and I'm only highlighting here what you might call a headline list. It goes much, much deeper. See, for instance, this list of Rothschild Zionists controlling ostensibly non-Jewish organizations. The neocon leadership wrote to Bill Clinton urging him to attack Iraq before 9/11, and they then went into overdrive to advocate the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan after the World Trade Center attacks under Bush. Interestingly, these same Rothschild Zionists, along with puppet Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld and Vice President Dick Cheney, both vehement supporters of Israel, launched a think tank before Bush came into office called the Project for the New American Century, known as PNAC. In September of 2000, this organization published a document called Rebuilding America's Defenses, Strategies, Forces, and Resources for a New Century, in which they called for American forces to fight and decisively win multiple simultaneous major theater wars with emphasis on places like Iraq, Iran, and North Korea. But the document said that this process of transformation is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and and cataclysing event like a new Pearl Harbor to justify it to the people. 1 year to the month after that document was published, and 9 months after most of these Rothschild Zionists came to power in the Bush administration, America did indeed have a new Pearl Harbor, which was then used to justify the agenda laid out in the document. Coincidence? Of course not. The Bush State of the Union address in 2002, which called Iraq, Iran, and North Korea the axis of evil, was written by the neocon David Frum, a Rothschild Zionist, now supporting the Rothschild Zionist Front. No labels, and was straight from the pages of the project for the New American Century document. The official 9/11 Commission investigation into what happened that day was only forced upon Bush and Cheney kicking and screaming, and the man they first appointed to head the commission was Henry Kissinger, a Rothschild Zionist. And this was so ludicrous and incredible that he resigned, citing conflicts of interest, which had never stopped him before. But the investigation and the final report was still overseen by Philip Zelikow, a Rothschild Zionist, and it decided that the official story was basically true after falling in to interview or quote key witnesses that gave another version of events. So I'm going to skip down here. It says, then there is the story of the 5, quote, dancing Israelis who were arrested after police received several calls from New Jersey residents outraged that Middle Eastern men were high-fiving, whooping, and cheering as they videotaped the burning Twin Towers. They were like happy, you know. They didn't look shocked to me, one witness said. And there actually is a videotape of the lady who reported them looking through the binoculars, and she told the story. I put that video link in the last video, so you can go look at it. And it was Elizabeth Vargas that did an interview about these 5 dancing Israelis that turned out to be Mossad. And of course, all of those connections to Mossad in the Bush administration. Police and FBI officers reportedly discovered maps of New York in the Israelis' white van with locations highlighted, and also $4,700 in cash hidden in a sock, foreign passports, and box cutters of the type alleged to have been used by the Arab hijackers. Gee. The type of box cutters used by the Arab hijackers. It was further reported that sniffer dogs found traces of explosives in their van, which belonged to a Mossad front company called Urban Moving Systems, owned by Israeli Dominic Suter, a Rothschild Zionist, who dropped everything literally. By judging the haste, the office was evacuated and fled back to Israel immediately after the attacks. The Forward, a Jewish newspaper, said the FBI found that at least 2 of the 5 arrested Israelis were Mossad agents, and that Urban Moving Systems was a Mossad front operation. So, you know, just like they just said that Joe Biden, one of his crimes is that he had 20 shell companies. So what this is, the same thing they were doing. It's a company that's just a front, makes it look like it's a real company on the outside, but inside, it's dead men's bones. Inside, it's fake, and it's a front for something else. So, usually an undercover intelligence operation. The 5 were held for 71 days, but then released without charge and allowed to return to Israel, where 3 of them appeared on television to say that their purpose was to document the event. Yes, an event that they knew was going to happen. Dr. Alan Sabrowski, former director of studies at the U.S. Army War College, and he is on video on YouTube speaking about this, that Israel was behind the attacks, has said publicly that U.S. military leaders now know that Israel and those traitors within our nation were responsible for the 9/11 attacks. See his interview after this article. 3 of the dancing Israelis on Israeli television. Since September 11th, we have been subjected to a series of bin Laden videos and other information promoting fear of Arab terrorism from 2 organizations called Intel Center and S.I.T.E. for the Search of International Terrorist Entities Institute, so long as they are not from Israel. Intel Center is headed by Ben Vensky, Rothschild Zionist, and the SITE was co-founded by Rita Katz, a Rothschild Zionist. In an article headed, "Is Israel Controlling Phony Terror News?" writers Gordon Duff and Brian Joubert asked some key questions. Who says Al-Qaeda takes credit for a bombing? Rita Katz. Who gets us bin Laden tapes? Rita Katz. Who gets us pretty much all information telling us Muslims are bad? Rita Katz. Rita Katz is the director of Site Intelligence, primary source for intelligence used by news services, Homeland Security, the FBI, and CIA. What is her qualification? She served in the Israeli Defense Force. She has a college degree, and most investigative journalists believe the Mossad helps her with her information. We find no evidence of any qualification whatsoever of any kind. A bartender has more intelligence gathering experience. Nobody verifies her claims. Site says Al-Qaeda did it. It hits the papers. Site says Israel didn't do it. That hits the papers too. What does Site really do? They check the internet for information, almost invariably information that Israel once reported, and it is sold as news, seen on American TV, reported in our papers, and passed around the internet almost as though it were actually true. Amazing, but not quite so amazing if you read this so far and have seen the extent to which the Rothschild Zionist secret society networks control and manipulate world events. Rothschild Zionist Katz and Vensky provide intelligence and bin Laden videos for security agencies and the media. And the media, we know, has been bought out by BlackRock, Larry Fink, a Jewish Israeli connected man. Okay, so, and it says, and Adam Gadon, pictured at the top here, is an alleged spokesman for Al-Qaeda who releases videos of himself supporting terrorism. His name is on the FBI most wanted terrorist list at that time. So how strange that Adam Gadon turns out to be a Jewish man called Adam Perlman, grandson of Carl Perlman, who served on the board of the rabid Rothschild Zionist Anti-Defamation League, the ADL. The chairman of the U.S. Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee is Senator Joseph Lieberman, Rothschild Zionist, who, like the Rothschild cesspit in general, is desperate to use the threat of terrorism to censor the internet to block the truth from coming out. Rothschild Zionists have kept exposure from the door up to now through ownership of the mainstream media. Jahar Ilan, a daily features editor with the leading Israeli newspaper Haaretz, wrote, quote, "The Jews, Rothschild Zionists, do control the American media. This is very clear, and claiming otherwise is an insult to common knowledge." So that was posted by the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. Not only in America either, and not only in the news media of Rothschild Zionist moguls like Rupert Murdoch, the Los Angeles Times columnist Joel Stein, another Rothschild Zionist, wrote an article reclaiming that Americans who don't think Jews, Rothschild Zionists, control Hollywood are just plain dumb. I had to scour the trades to come up with 6 Gentiles in high positions at entertainment companies, but lo and behold, even one of that 6, AMC President Charles Collier, turned out to be a Jew. As a proud Jew, I want Americans to know our accomplishment. Yes, we control Hollywood, he says. Okay, so I emphasize again that we are not talking here about the Jews owning the media, Hollywood, politics, banking, and big business, but it is a tiny clique answering ultimately to the secret society that I call Rothschild Zionism. And a lot of this, I believe, is the ultra-Orthodox that want to pass those draconian laws upon the rest of the nations. So listen to this. The mass of Jewish people have been mercilessly used and abused by the Rothschild networks that don't give a you-know-what about them. They are not pursuing what is best for Jewish people as a whole, but what suits the Rothschild conspiracy for global domination on behalf of their hidden masters. And of course, this is their goal, in their own words, that they want to be the world's Supreme Court, and they want to try people who do not follow their laws that they put in place that are man-made rabbinical laws. The Rothschilds and their Zionist secret society web control American government policy on Israel and everything else. And it's the same in Britain and country after country, including France, Germany, of course, Italy, Belgium, and the European Union, which was a Rothschild creation from the start. Obama's first major speech on the Middle East in 2008 was, according to the Wall Street Journal, written for him by James Steinberg, Rothschild Zionist, Daniel Kurtzer, Rothschild Zionist, and Dennis Ross, Rothschild Zionist. It was delivered to the Rothschild Zionist lobby group, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, known as IPAC. Any chance of it being biased against the Palestinians, do you think? The man appointed to oversee the war in Afghanistan and the targeting of Pakistan was Richard Holbrooke, also a Rothschild Zionist. Obama's special representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan, who died in December of 2010. Israel receives about $3 billion in direct foreign assistance each year, which is roughly 1/5 of America's entire foreign aid budget. In per capita terms, the United States gives each Israeli a direct subsidy worth of about $500 per year. This largesse is especially striking when one realizes that Israel is now a wealthy industrial state with a per capita income roughly equal to South Korea or Spain. The U.S. House of Representatives recently approved another $205 million in military aid for Israel for an anti-missile system. And when it comes to defense, military and intelligence cooperation, the relationship between the U.S. and Israel has never been stronger, said Democrat Representative Steve Rothman, Rothschild Zionist, a member of the House Appropriations Defense Subcommittee. As he spoke, the Israeli authorities were using their American-supplied military might to continue the blockade of the Gaza Strip, which has been stopping supplies of food, fuel, and basic needs for 1.5 million Palestinians since 2007. So the writer of this says, I have set out here to reveal the true face of Zionism, the House of Rothschild and its networks, and how its agents in big government, banking, business, pharma, biotech, media, and so on are working as one unit to impose a global Orwellian dictatorship on the human population, including the mass of Jewish people. So once they put that king on the throne, and the king starts allowing the people that they put in the judiciary as the world's Supreme Court, then the Jewish people will be subjected to whatever the king says because he's ruling over them. And how can this happen other than the fact that they've been thinking about becoming part of the Commonwealth of King Charles III, which would put him as the king, as I've talked about so many times. This is the plan, people. There's no doubt in my mind. The Holy Spirit revealed it from Scripture. And it's unbelievable how it all comes together. Okay, so now I gotta hurry because, my battery gets low, but I want to get all of this in. Okay, Dov Zakheim is an American businessman, writer, and former official of the United States government in the Reagan administration. He held various Department of Defense positions. In 2000, Zakheim was a member of the Vulcans, a group of foreign policy advisors assisting George W. Bush's presidential campaign. From 2001 to 2004, he was under Secretary of Defense, Controller, and Chief Financial Officer of the Department of Defense. He was one of this group of foreign policy advisors of George Bush called the Vulcans. Now, if I'm not mistaken, he had dual citizenship. I think I just said that to you in a prior clip. So now I'm going to blow the lid off of this thing. You're not going to believe it. The Vulcans is a nickname used to refer to Republican presidential candidate George W. Bush's foreign policy advisory team assembled to brief him prior to the 2000 U.S. presidential election. And the Vulcans, like Spock, the Vulcans were led by Condoleezza Rice, a former member of the National Security Council. The group's ranks included Richard Armitage, Robert Blackwell, Stephen Hadley, Richard Pearl, Dov Zakheim, that I just told you about, Robert Zoellick, Paul Wolfowitz, and Wolfowitz's protege, Scooter Libby. During the campaign, Bush sought to deflect questions about his own lack of foreign policy experience by pointing to this group of experienced advisors. After the election, all the members of the team received key positions within the new Bush administration. Other key campaign figures included Dick Cheney, George Shultz, Colin Powell were also closely associated with the group, but were never actually members. The name, the Vulcans, alludes to, this is going to blow you away, and I have the chills even saying it. The name Vulcans alludes to a huge statue of Vulcan, the Roman god of fire and metalworking, or steel working, in Rice's hometown of Birmingham, Alabama. It may also allude to fictional, human-like alien beings who suppress their emotions in favor of cold, rational logic in Star Trek. The most famous of those Vulcans is Spock, played by Leonard Nimoy, a Jewish man. Incidentally, Dov Zakheim is also a book author, and he has a book called The Prince and the Emperors, The Life and Times of Rabbi Judah the Prince. Do you think that they're working to set Israel up as the global government of the world, with the Supreme Court of the world being their rabbinical Sanhedrin revived, with one leader over them, the king, that will be put on the supposed throne of David, that will become the Antichrist figure? So think about the Twin Towers. Think about them being made out of steel. You got to keep this in mind, because in Birmingham, Alabama is this gigantic Vulcan statue and Vulcan Park. The statue of Vulcan, and this is what this group under Bush, his advisors were called the Vulcans. And the statue of Vulcan looks down over the city of Birmingham from a height of almost 600 feet. Watching over the city, it was built to symbolize the 56-foot, 60-ton statue is the largest iron figure ever cast, and at the time it was made, it was the biggest statue created in the United States and the second tallest statue in the country, behind the Statue of Liberty. Conceived for the 1904 World's Fair, the statue was cast with iron made from ore mined at Red Mountain, on which it now rests, in an effort to advertise Birmingham and promote Alabama's iron industry. In Roman mythology, Vulcan was the god of fire and blacksmithing, and the counterpart of the Greek god Hephaestus, born to Jupiter. Now, Jupiter is another name for Zeus, which was the abomination of desolation that was put in the temple during the time of the Maccabees. Born to Jupiter and Juno, and he was the builder of palaces and weapons for gods and demigods. Birmingham's association with Vulcan dates to the 1880s, a time when Alabama was the nation's fourth highest producer of iron and steel, fueled by the area's rich coal, limestone, and ore deposits. And Birmingham was expanding rapidly as a result. The image of Vulcan was assimilated into a short-lived Mardi Gras tradition from 1896 to 1900, in which the king of the celebration masqueraded as Rex Vulcan or King Vulcan. In 1903, a lack of funds derailed the state government's plans to present an exhibit at the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis, Missouri. The Commercial Club of Birmingham, now the Birmingham Area Chamber of Commerce, took on the task of creating an exhibit under the leadership of club president Frederick M. Jackson and state fair director J.A. McKnight, who conceived the idea of a giant iron man. The Commercial Club approved the project in October of 1903, although opinions differ over whether to sculpt an ugly Vulcan or a handsome Mercury, the Roman god of commerce and travel. Ultimately, the blacksmith god was chosen to showcase Birmingham's industrial might. So it was one of the steel capitals of the world, and the Twin Towers were built from steel. And the Bush administration, his advisors were known as the Vulcans, the god of blacksmithing and steel. Any coincidence there? The Lord is revealing this now. The club first called for the figure to rise 50 feet, then increased the height to 6 feet to surpass a 52-foot bronze Buddha in Tokyo. With 2,000 square feet reserved at the Palace of Mines and Metallurgy on the St. Louis Fairgrounds, McKnight commissioned Italian sculptor Giuseppe Moretti, whose credentials included works for the Austro-Hungarian Emperor, the city of Pittsburgh, and American industrialist William Vanderbilt. Moretti agreed to complete a plaster cast in 40 days as the World's Fair opening day loomed on April 30th of 1904. And working in New Jersey, Moretti designed Vulcan standing next to an anvil, holding aloft a spear point in his right hand and a hammer in his left. He created an 8-foot clay prototype of his vision. And in January of 1904, he and 16 assistants began work on a full-size plaster cast, which were transported to Birmingham by train, and the last section arriving on March 8th. The figure was cast from pig iron at Sloss Furnaces in Birmingham between March 10th and April 16th at Birmingham Steel and Iron Company under the direction of Moretti and company president James R. McWayne. During the casting and molding process, members of the Commercial Club's Vulcan Committee raised funds by assembling the plaster cast, and it was the first time Vulcan was raised in its entirety, and the club charged 10 cents to view it and sold 12-inch bronze replicas. Another promotion took place when the minor league Birmingham Barons baseball team hosted the New York Giants for 3 exhibition games. The third game fell on what was coined Vulcan Day, a fundraising effort in which the Barons took the name the Iron Men for the day, and Giants star pitcher Joe Iron Man McGinnity thrilled the crowd. The first sections of the metal statue began their journey to St. Louis on April 18th, but the final piece did not arrive until mid-May. Nevertheless, the particularly constructed Vulcan was a crowd favorite, and it was fully assembled and dedicated June 7th. That's exactly the day that Jerusalem was liberated in 1968, June 7th, 1968, and christened with Cahaba River water in place of champagne. And the figure won a grand prize in September, and Moretti, McWayne, and McKnight were awarded silver medals for their efforts. City officials from St. Louis and San Fran sought to purchase the Colossus. the latter intended on employing it as a West Coast version of the Statue of Liberty. Birmingham rejected the offers, and in February of 1905, the statue was taken apart and shipped home, where it was unloaded in a field on Red Mountain. Various civic groups argued over the statue's future, and many Birmingham residents reacted negatively to its appearance, rejecting the commercial club's proposal to display it downtown in Capitol Park, now called Lynn Park. The club finally approved a site for the statue in 1906 Alabama State Fair, and workers in their haste bolted on the right arm incorrectly so that the hand could not hold the spear point. Vulcan remained at the fairgrounds until the 1930s and was adorned with advertisements for such products as Coca-Cola and Liberty overalls. In 1935, a Birmingham committee led by the Kiwanis Club successfully convinced the Works Progress Administration, a Depression-era federal agency founded to create employment, to move Vulcan to a site on Red Mountain that the Tennessee Coal, Iron, and Railroad Company sold to the city for $5. The WPA provided the bulk of the funding for the project, and in 1936 Vulcan Park was built, including a museum and a 124-foot pedestal with an open-air observation platform. The statue was fully assembled on its new perch in May of 1937, and in May of 1939 Vulcan Park was completed with a museum and cascading pools gracing the south side of the mountain. And in 1946 the Birmingham Junior Chamber of Commerce replaced the spear point with a cone-shaped neon light that glowed green if the city had not seen a traffic fatality, and red if it had. After the statue was installed on Red Mountain, cracks developed as a result of the differential expansion rates of the metal and the concrete that was poured into the hollow cavity in the 1930s, and water had also entered the statue through an opening in the head, caused rust, and the statue was repaired in the 1960s, and in 1971 the city painted Vulcan the color of iron ore, widened the pedestal, and closed the observation deck. The Vulcan Park Foundation was founded in 1999 to undertake a major renovation of the park and statue. After repairs and some recasting by Robinson Iron in Alexander City, the statue was painted gray and the pedestal was restored to approximate its original appearance. The park and museum reopened in 2004 to provide a sweeping view of the city and to educate visitors on the Vulcan statue's significance in Birmingham history. Birmingham, Alabama, where the Vulcan statue, who is the god of metallurgy, steel, working with metal and forging it, gave the name to George W. Bush's team of advisors. So let's look at the role of steel in the World Trade Centers and the engineering of the Twin Towers. In September of 2020, the country looked back to what was a history life-altering event that happened in New York but shook the entire nation. The day of September 11th is never easy to revisit, but remembering our history is an important part of understanding our present. When they built the World Trade Center towers, for the columns that comprised the walls, there was a mixture of 12 different types of steel. The yield points on these were 42,000 pounds per square inch, and 100,000 psi were used. The yield point refers to the amount of load the steel can take before its behavior starts to shift a little. The engineers had to carefully plan that the interior steel columns would not take the brunt of the weight. Interior columns were constructed out of a special kind of steel called A36 with a yield strength of 36,000 psi. The thickness of the column also varied throughout the structure. In areas, the thickness ranged from 0.25 inches at the very top of the building to 4 inches at the base. Part of the revolutionary design created by Yamasaki and his engineers was the idea of the two hollow tubes, which were mostly supported by closely spaced steel columns encased in aluminum. The exterior steel lattice would be bound and connected by robust floor trusses that would connect it to the interior steel core of the building. And this helped the exterior or skin of the building to help with support and not put all the weight on the interior steel column. The tower stood at 110 stories high and soared into New York's skyline for almost 30 years. The floors between the supporting walls and interior columns were constructed from slabs of steel of 5 inches thick, of lighter weight steel. Overall, once you step back, the structure utilized approximately 200,000 tons of super strong steel. Okay, so the advisors of President Bush took the name the Vulcans from this Vulcan statue that soars over the city of Birmingham. And Birmingham, Alabama is one of the top steel industries cities in the whole world. So the Vulcan statue there in Birmingham, Alabama is the largest cast iron statue in the world and is the city symbol of Birmingham, Alabama, United States, reflecting its roots in the iron and steel industry. The 56-foot tall statue depicts the Roman god Vulcan, god of the fire and forge, with ironworking equipment. It was created as Birmingham's entry for the Louisiana Purchase Exposition 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis, Missouri. While it is the world's largest made of iron, it is also among the nation's tallest statues of any kind. So it is depicting Birmingham, reflecting the roots of its steel industry. And the Twin Towers were made of steel that were destroyed. People ask, why is there a Vulcan statue in Birmingham? Vulcan is the Roman god of fire and forge. A forge is a shop with a furnace where metal is heated and hammered out into useful items. So what happened with the Twin Towers? They were heated and the metal melted. Why is Birmingham called the Magic City? Birmingham was historically referred to as the Magic City because its soil contained the three necessary elements to produce iron, limestone, coal, and iron ore. And these are the things needed to produce steel. Why is Birmingham called Black Country? The Black Country gained its name in the mid-19th century due to the smoke from the many thousands of ironworking foundries and forges, plus the working of the shallow and 30-foot thick coal seams. Why did Birmingham, Alabama grow into a major southern city and center of iron and steel production following the Civil War? The site of the railroad crossing was notable for the nearby deposits of iron ore, coal, and limestone, the three main raw materials used in making steel. Birmingham is the only place worldwide where significant amounts of all three minerals can be found in close proximity. So is there another connection between the steel towers and the Vulcans representing Birmingham, Alabama, and the statue of Vulcan, the god of fire and forging, heating metal until it liquefies? Okay, Birmingham sits in the Jones Valley, one of few places in the world harboring all three ingredients needed to make iron and steel: coal, limestone, and iron ore. Birmingham began life as a workshop town devoted to extracting and refining these minerals. I don't even know how to tell you how that gave me the chills when the Lord put that before my eyes. The George W. Bush advisors were named after the Vulcan in Birmingham, Alabama, the biggest place of making steel on the planet, and those twin towers were made out of steel, and they melted. Just like the Vulcan made the metal by forging it, a liquid form of metal, to create whatever they wanted. There has to be a connection to this in the Bush administration. And we know all of the things regarding Bush and being at the schoolhouse and everything that happened with him. So I don't need to go into that because everybody knows all that information. I'm just trying to bring you something that's not known. And when I saw that connection of that Vulcan fire god of forging steel, I just thought, you've got to be kidding me. Wow. So, this is the end of part 2, and I hope you enjoyed hearing this. I hope you appreciate all the work I go to do all of these videos to try to bring you the truth. And, you know, I think we need to draw closer to Jesus because these days are getting more and more wicked, and there's deceptions galore. Already the church is already deceived about that all of Israel is going to be all great and good, and yet the Antichrist is going to sit in their temple. The Antichrist is already there through the Sanhedrin, who wants to impose their Supreme Court laws on the nations of the world. This is not a conspiracy theory at all. These are facts laid out before your eyes. So, I just hope you will appreciate it and see the value in somebody's trying to bring you the truth. This thing about the Vulcans is just mind-blowing. Now remember that, you know, Leonard Nimoy was Jewish, and he would always do the Vulcan sign, you know, with the, that's actually the Jewish priestly way that they hold their hands. So, anyway, there's a lot of connections there with Israel and the Mossad, that's for sure. And it's all been covered up because they don't want it to get out that they are trying to create a one world government with a one world religion and have all the nations representative there in the Sanhedrin building that they're going to build. And have the Supreme Court rule on all the cases and impose their draconian laws. Remember, they don't want the gospel. They don't want Jesus' name spoken there. And they tried to get this law passed, but Netanyahu did not allow it to pass. Something happens to him, who knows what would happen. You know, how they would impose these laws through a king that they appoint to sit on their throne. So that's how it's going to go down. And this should just really blow your mind. I'm speechless, I guess. I'm just speechless. I would say that Birmingham should remove the abomination statue, because there's only one true God, and He's the creator of the universe. And they don't need this false god of forging metal and steel. Strange connection, that's for sure. Alright, well, I'll see you in the next video. Shalom for now.